Hey everybody. Today I'm going to work from chapter 12 in the Photoshop Classroom in a Book 2024 release, and we're going to learn something about camera raw files. So let's go. The first thing we're going to do is open Photoshop, and for this lesson, I want to restore the default preferences so that all of our screens will look the same. So on a Windows machine, you'll hold down Control-Alt-Shift as you open Photoshop, and on a Macintosh, you'll press Command-Option-Shift and open Photoshop. Delete the Adobe Photoshop settings file. Yes, this is the new 2025, the latest version of Photoshop, so it might look a little different if you are working from the book like me. If it's the first time you've opened this newest version of Photoshop, you might see this bar across the bottom says Explore Now. So I suggest doing that. It's kind of neat, some of the stuff that's been introduced with the newest version, and it always worthwhile to know what the tool can do. I've already done that, so I'm going to X out. Now, to get started with the lesson from today, I'm going to choose File, Open, and I'll select on my computer. And then in my Lesson 12 folder where I keep these files, I'll choose Mission, open that. I'll click on one of them and then hold down my Shift key and click on the third one to select all. And they are in the .crw format. That is a raw format. It's the Canon raw format. Here on the screen, you also see NEF. That's the Nikon raw format. There are a variety of raw formats, all of which work with Photoshop. So here, because these are in the CRW format, I'll just click open and they'll open in Adobe Camera Raw. A raw camera file, usually in our cameras, we're getting JPEGs, right? JPG. And what those are is the camera's interpretation of the data that it reads from its sensor. So the camera decides what the red channel looks like, what the green channel looks like, what the blue channel looks like. And it compresses the picture and throws away a lot of information. And so what a raw file is just the data straight out of the camera. Nothing has been separated. It really is all numbers and computer stuff. So what we can do with a raw file, we have more flexibility in editing it. And that's one of the things that the Adobe Camera Raw allows us to do, is to make those adjustments and keep all of the data that comes from the camera. And then we can make some pretty radical adjustments and do a lot of edits right here in Camera Raw. This part down here is called the film strip. If this film strip is over on the vertical, on the right hand side, you can come down here into this menu button, the film strip button, and choose whether to show it or hide it or change it to vertical orientation. All right, here we go. I'm going to keep mine on the bottom. That's the way I like to read it. So I press Control and click on the film strip and choose to show it horizontally. And we can see each of these images. It looks like they were all taken of the same things at basically the same time of day, these Spanish mission church. In Camera Raw, Adobe provides a bunch of profiles. Those are right here on the right-hand side. We can see the profile right now is Adobe Color. These profiles that Adobe provides can tweak the image according to presets that Adobe has decided on. So for example, the landscape profile sort of boosts the natural colors like blue and green. We'll choose a landscape here to give us a good start. And you see how it became a little richer? Let's look at the before and after button, right? Before, after. This button right here allows us to see the before and after. And this might be useful for you all if you want to see the changes as you make them. So here's the before image, and here's the after image when we chose Adobe Landscape Profile. This panel stack here on the right-hand side is generally organized in the way that you might proceed through your edit process in Camera Raw. Here we have the red, green, and blue channels and the data reflected there, and that will change live as we make changes to the image. We'll look at the auto and black and white and HDR options here in a moment, but the first thing we're going to change is the white balance. What white balance is it's the color temperature of an image. under different light conditions, colors can be altered under different light conditions, light temperatures. For example, fluorescent lights give off one kind of color and daylight gives off another kind of color. Your camera might be set to something like auto white balance, but if the white balance is off in your original image, one of the things that Camera Raw allows us to do is to change the white balance because all that data is still there. So here we have the white balance as shot, and we can change it either using one of the presets for the different light temperatures that we might want to reflect. So here's auto, a little yellow and orange. Daylight is a blue color. There's cloudy, kind of pinkish. Shade would be if it was in the shade of maybe one of these trees here. Tungsten are your orange kind of colored light bulbs at home. Fluorescents are more blue and green. Flash is basically a daylight type color. And then custom would be entering the actual Kelvin value of the temperature here. But in our case, I'm going to put it back on as shot, and I'll use this dropper here. What you do with the dropper is select a white or neutral colored area of the image, and then all of the other colors will be rebalanced as if that is white. I just clicked on the cloud here and it did recolor everything, but it doesn't really look right. Maybe clouds aren't neutral colored. Maybe they are, taking on some color characteristics of things around them. So I'm going to come down here to the bottom and click here on this sign, and that looks pretty nice, right? It's a little dark, but I think that the color cast is gone. So by clicking down here in this little sign, I can see that I like the color balance now. It looks right. And you can sort of see the difference here in these two. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see what I'm doing. Here is the sign, and here's how it looked originally. So I've now applied this custom white balance to it, and that is interpreted as 6,250 Kelvin. The tint is the balance between green and magenta, so we've dialed back the green a little bit. Vibrance and saturation are kind of the same thing. Saturation raises the intensity of all the colors equally, where vibrance has a bigger effect on colors that are not quite there, are not saturated enough. So vibrance sort of brings everything up in concert with the most saturated thing, and saturation just raises everything. So we've made these changes, and now might be a good time for us. We've decided visually sort of how we like this or what we think it should look like. Photoshop uses some of their AI technology to allow the image to be adjusted automatically. So we can click auto to see what Photoshop thinks, and these are the adjustments that it made. Pretty close to ours, at least under white balance. Under light, it's quite different, right? Black and white uses the same kind of operation to do a high quality black and white conversion, and high dynamic range gives sort of a wider range to the colors and lightness and darkness within the image. So here we'll start with auto. I know that we already made our changes, but this is a good starting point for our process. And then we can just kind of work our way down. We already set our Adobe landscape profile. And then here under light, if we raise the exposure one time, you can see how bright it's made the church tower there. So let's set that back to like 0.5. Contrast will be 0. Highlights -20. We'll make the shadows 70. Ooh, 70. They only go up to 100. Whites will be 20 and blacks -10. I use these numbers because they're the ones in the book, but you can experiment as you like to see, sort of what you think is the best arrangement. Also, if you hold down the Option key on a Mac, you can see which areas of the image will be clipped, as in losing detail because it's over adjusted. And by holding down the Option key, as we slide some of these, in this case where we have the +0.5, we can see that the pixels are okay if they appear either black or white. Right, so we can live with some clipping, such as I think the crosses here we saw right? And a little bit of detail that's what's going to be blown out or not really represented in the image. You can do the same thing with highlights and shadows. You see shadows. If they're white, if in the sense of shadows, if it's white, it's okay. In the sense of highlights, if it's black, it's okay. Whites, blacks. This is what it means with HDR limit. I should explain here. Stops on a camera are the amount of light that's let in. And so the HDR is going to give us the values, kind of the best values from each of those 4 stops. So it expands the amount of colors between total light and total darkness. And so we can move on down these changes here, making any of the other edits that we'd like to do. Let's open up detail to work on the sharpening in the image. First, in order to see what we're doing with the detail in the image, let's move in so that we can see what we're changing. I'll use my spacebar to make the hand tool and drag that up so we can see some of these nice details in the door. If when you open the detail menu by clicking on this caret here, if sharpening is all you see, go ahead and click on this triangle at the right-hand side. And the best practice for detail is to kind of max out the sharpening value, and then each of these 3 things that drop down, the radius, the detail, and the masking, are actually attributes of that sharpening amount. So what we can do is max out the sharpening and then set these radius, detail, masking settings, and then dial the sharpening back, the sort of application of those settings. We can dial it back, and that will give us our ideal amount of sharpening. So radius here determines how far out from a pixel that the sharpening is applied. And so according to the book, it says for properly focused images without motion blur, a radius value of about 1 pixel works well. That's a good starting point. You might, for example, decrease the radius for things with a lot of fine details that are precisely focused, or increase the radius if you want to sharpen blurred details. We'll take this down to maybe 0.5, and then we can see 1 and 1.5. So you see how much more sharp this looks at 1.5. Let's just go down to 0.9. We're going to leave the detail at 25. What detail controls is the balance between edges and textures. So if you move the value of detail lower, you get broad, smooth areas. And if you move it higher, then you're going to bring out texture in those areas. For example, here in the texture of this church, right, we'll dial it up and see all that in there. And then no detail becomes very, very smooth. And so we're just looking for a sort of sweet spot in there, right? Let's move this. Yeah, I'm going to take the sharpening down to 100 because 150 was making it a little bit difficult to see. So I can live with that. We'll leave it at 25. Then we have masking. That is like the detail slider because it helps keep the sharpening constrained along the edges of things. You can use a higher masking value to increase the overall sharpening value without over sharpening noise and texture. Then if you lower the masking value, you might want the sharpening to emphasize detail in broad areas, like weave of threads in a fabric, the pattern on this church building. So let's see what masking does. You can see how the remaining sort of camera texture in here has gone with about 12 in our masking slider. The book suggests 61, and that's what that looks like. Very smooth, right? Very smooth texture. So masking is sort of like a more detailed detail option. That's 61, and that's 12. Yeah, sure, I can see how that is. Do you see the texture, kind of the junk popping up in here, this noise? So we'll put it on 60-something. This noise reduction option is something that comes as part of Camera Raw's Enhance ability. And what Enhance does is it uses AI, as it says here in the window, to improve image quality. The result will be saved as a new digital negative, which is the Camera Raw suffix for your files. So here we can use this to say denoise by 50. So that's 0 denoising. And here's the maximum, 100. And maybe we go somewhere in the middle. Subtlety is almost always the answer with this kind of work. I'll take it. I think that's okay. I'm clicking in this image here to move around and see different parts of it. Here's some text. Maybe we can look at this. It's 100. Oops, there's 0, somewhere in the middle. Raw details is automatically applied in this instance, and super resolution can't be used now with denoise, but it will double the amount of pixels in your image. I've found that useful if I have a small, low resolution image. One of the first things that I'll do is use super resolution to, quote, enhance it. You can learn more about all that stuff here by clicking Learn More. I'll denoise it by 50, choose Enhance, and it's working. So, right, it's making a new file now. That file will appear in the film strip. Here we go. So here's my original one, mission01.crw, which is the camera raw file. I have enhanced this file, and now I have another file called mission1 enhanced NR, noise reduction. I actually don't want this enhanced file, so I'm going to come over here and click on the 3 dots and choose mark for deletion. Okay. Image will be moved to trash up there in my left-hand corner, as you can see. Like we mentioned earlier, this has these 3 images we have all were taken about the same time of day. So we can synchronize these settings across all 3 of the images so that we don't have to do it all over again. To do that, I'll come down here and click on the film strip button and choose select all. You can see how the little little gray box lit up around each of them. Then we can click and hold this film strip setting again and choose sync settings. In the synchronize window, we can choose which settings we want to synchronize. In this case, even though we haven't used all of them, I can go ahead and click OK, and our changes will now be reflected in these new images. So for example, here under detail, 100.92563, 100.92563. We have updated each of these images and synchronized the settings. This is the before and this is the after among the 3 of these images. This would be very helpful if you were doing a portrait session or like this landscape exploration, travel. If you have a lot of pictures taken all under the same light conditions, then you can sync these settings across them to have a better starting point for any further editing that you want to do. And now I'll click and hold in the film strip window again, choose select all again, or you could choose Command A on your keyboard to select all of the images in the film strip. After I have made sure that all of my images are selected, I'll come up to the Convert and Save Selected Images button up here in the top right. I'll click on it to get these save options. I'll save them in the same folder, my Lesson 12 mission folder. Under file naming, I'll just choose the document name. For file extension, I'll choose .jpg. We are making downsized, compressed images reflecting our changes that we can then post on the internet, send to clients, etc. These images will not be able to be reopened in Camera Raw. The adjustments we've made in Camera Raw are now baked in when you save it as a JPEG. If you don't want to include all of this camera data, metadata, you might choose just to have copyright only. Quality is 8, high, that'll do. And then under image sizing, we're going to resize all of them. And I'm going to select long side and choose 800 pixels. That means that the longest side, whether horizontal or vertical, will be 800 pixels, and these will be easy to post and look pretty nice on phones and screens. The resolution of 300 is good. That'll make a really nice print if somebody chooses to print a JPEG. You can do additional sharpening here depending on your output that you're looking to produce. So for example, I might save one version for screen so that I could email it to people or post on the internet. I might save one version for glossy paper and print that out. I might save another version for matte paper and print that out as well to compare them. Amount, standard, you'll have to experiment with these. We've already sharpened it, so it might be sharp enough. And then I'll click save. And so now we can see in my Lesson 12 folder, I have these 3 JPEG images that are all much smaller than the original Camera Raw images, 121 kilobytes versus 6.1 megabytes. And now we will open this in Photoshop. Opening it in Photoshop would allow us to do anything that we can't do in Camera Raw. Collaging or adding text or, other things that Photoshop does. Here, then, on the bottom right-hand side, I'll click on this caret next to open and choose open as object. What that does is opens it as a smart object in Photoshop, which will allow us to make changes in Camera Raw indefinitely. A smart object is kind of embedded in a file as a separate file. So if you chose open, you would get this, but you wouldn't be able to come back to Camera Raw and make any of these changes again. Open as object preserves that raw editing capability. So that's what I'll choose. Photoshop opens, and here we are. This little doohickey here, the little picture at the bottom right-hand corner, that means it's a smart object. And now that we've opened it here in Photoshop, we can do whatever our additional changes are to it. We've opened all three of them, and now we can carry on with our workflow. And that's it. That's Camera Raw. To complete this tutorial, please choose File, Save As, Format, PDF, and then upload to Blackboard. Okay, save PDF. Yes, I want to continue. And here's the file I would upload to Blackboard. I would change it to Parker Mission 01, and then I would upload that file to Blackboard. I didn't point out earlier, each of these, the raw files have what are called sidecar files. And those are these XMP files. And those are the ones that contain the editable data that makes it look like a picture to us. Camera Raw formatted files, although they are represented by a preview image, are really just a stream of data. And it's the XMP file that translates that to an editable, viewable format for us. So one little extra thing. Now that we've saved our file as a PDF and renamed it, we are going to submit it to Blackboard to complete part 1 of this tutorial. I'll have another video for portrait editing in Camera Raw shortly.